Okay, welcome everyone to the latest in our Alliance Live interview series. My name is Sara Redmond and I am Chief Officer of Development at the Health and Social Care Alliance. And today I am joined by Sam Smith, Jim Elderwood-Ward, Michael McEwan and Ruth Hughes, where we're going to consider our response to the Coming Home Implementation Report. I'm going to introduce our speakers and then we're just going to cover a little bit about the why this is an important issue that we need to be talking about and really raising awareness of. Firstly though, I'm really pleased that we have such an esteemed panel of stakeholders speaking with us today about this. So we have Sam Smith, who is founder and chief executive of Sea Change Scotland. And Sea Change is a not-for-profit organisation supporting disabled people to live the lives that they choose. And she also writes and campaigns on issues of human rights, equality and social justice. Jim has had a lifelong experience of disability, not only as a service user, but also as a service provider, planner, researcher and activist. He is chair of Glasgow Centre for Inclusive Living, chair of the Scottish Independent Living Coalition and deputy convener of Inclusion Scotland. He has also written extensively on around the fields of independent living and disability rights. We also have Ruth, and Ruth is mum of Gordon, who has been in hospital for 5 years, beyond what he actually needs to be. And we have Michael, who is a freelance journalist and campaigner. So a really, really knowledgeable panel of speakers with us today. Before handing on, Ruth, I think maybe initially to yourself, I guess just to put a bit of context around this, the stated vision and ambition for the National Care Service is that everyone should be supported to live as independently as possible and drive the decisions about their health and well-being and the support that they need, and that their human rights should be respected, protected and fulfilled. And this includes all people, and yet we have a situation in Scotland where these rights are not being protected for everybody. And I wonder whether you could come in and just to set the scene for people who are watching this interview, why this is such an important issue we need to be speaking about.
Well, it's such an important issue because what happened in my situation with my son was when Gordon got difficulties in the community, and we went to try and seek help. The appropriate help wasn't in place, which led to us really getting into crisis point, although we had been trying to access the help. So obviously when crisis did happen with Gordon, really all decisions were taken out of our hands, and it was a pretty horrendous time. And Gordon did not cope well due to being autistic, and also he was pretty unwell and traumatised at the time through just everything that had happened. But once you get into a system where decisions are taken from you, you're not listened to, and then it just comes out of your hands, well, it just gets to a point where it unravels, and really there is no going back, because once what happened with Gordon, once he got into the system, the wrong decisions were made, the appropriate care wasn't there, the appropriate placement for care, which led to him being where he is now, and it really has had a catastrophic effect. And if the right help had been in place, Gordon wouldn't be where he is now, and that's why we have to make sure that provisions are put in place for people with disabilities that do get into crisis, because it would make such a big difference to the outcomes of their lives going forward. And really now, with regards to Gordon, he's trapped, not getting any better, and really, because of that vicious circle and not being listened to, he's lost his hope for the future, and I really don't know what's going to happen. And it is really an awful thing, and I wouldn't wish it on anybody. So things do have to change.
And you know, the experience that you're describing, Ruth, for Gordon. So this is the situation where people, not because of a clinical need, not because of an actual kind of treatment need, but because the right care and support is not available in the community, where people are then being put in arrangements either out of the area of where they live or inappropriate settings, because there hasn't been the right care in place. And Sam, I wonder if I can bring you in on that, because recently there was the publication of the Coming Home Implementation Report, and I know that individuals and organisations such as Sea Change were concerned about the I guess the spirit of the implementation report, as well as some of the recommendations or the priorities that were set out, and I wonder if you could just kind of outline some of those.
There was a number of us who were concerned about the perspective that was put forward in the report. Whilst it talked about human rights and it talked about, use the language of disability advocacy, the whole tenor of the report was that this group of people are somehow profoundly different to other disabled people. And we know that's not the case. We know that for the number of people like Gordon and others, there are people living good lives in the community, being supported well. One of the people that was meant to be with us today and speaking from his experiences, a gentleman called Matt Quinn. Matt spent some time in an assessment and treatment unit because he went through a rough time in his teens, and he spent a bit of time there. He was then supported out with the assessment and treatment unit, and it didn't work. It failed really quickly. He was failed really quickly. He went back into the assessment and treatment unit. But because there were other things in place, he was then supported to move on. So that it was a difficult period in his life. However, he has lived in his own home, being supported. He has positions of respect and authority now. It was a blip in his life. It wasn't something that changed the course of his life. And that's the issue. If you need crisis treatment and assessment, then get it. But the fact that you're being detained for long periods of time for something that is not treatable is the issue. So the thrust of the report, the bit that was in some respects most difficult, was about the othering of this group of people as if they were somehow so fundamentally different, whereas actually what the singular aspect of this group of people is that they have been failed most badly by a system, and we know how to do differently. Unfortunately, the recommendations in the Coming Home Implementation Report, because it didn't gather the views of disabled people and or families, don't appear to many of us to be the answer.
And I think what you're outlining there, Sam, around that decisions, decisions have been taken away from people, not because that was in the decision that was taken in the best interest or to protect those rights of those individuals, but because the system had no other response available to itself. And I'm aware that within, you know, Scotland's legislation, you know, the principles of choice and control and you know, dignity and you know, freedom are built into our you know, legislative framework. And Jim, I wonder whether I could bring you in then, because you know, the Self-Directed Support Act does talk about, you know, choice and control and you know, from your perspective, you know, what are the issues here that need to be addressed?
From 2013, the default position of social care is self-directed support. That means that everybody should have an individual budget which they can decide how they want to spend it. This report coming home does not mention the default position of social care. And I think that's a grave omission. If we are to allow people to decide how they want to live, with whom they want to live, and how they want to live, then we need to promote self-directed support. Since the year 2013, the Scottish Government have spent £43 million on promoting self-directed support, and yet we are still hearing about people languishing miles away from their home with no decisions about how they want to live. When I was a manager in Glasgow back in the 90s, I came across a gentleman who had been in residential care in Wales for over 20 years. In the past 10 years, nobody from the department had bothered to go down to Wales to find out how he was living and whether or not he was happy. We were spending about £1,500 a week on this guy back in the 90s. And nobody had the thought of saying how this guy managing in Wales. And that is a travesty. We dumped him in Wales and forgot all about them paying £1,500 a week to keep him there. The FTS means that people need to have the money to decide how, where, and with whom they want to live. And when we all got that set up running, despite £43 million from the government helping local authorities to develop the default position of self-directed support. That is a travesty.
And from the signs of what you're saying, you know, this is not that we don't have the legal, the levers in place. You know, the self-directed support legislation, you know, does allow for that provision, but that outlining of your experience back in the 90s and the fact that we're still experiencing this, in 2022. And I think, that really struck me from reading the Coming Home Implementation Report, is that actually these issues have been known to us for a very long period of time, and yet the situation is continuing. And I wonder whether, because your point about people having the right to choose how, where and with whom they want to live, and so I guess there is a dimension here about housing and the spaces and the places that we live, and the implementation report does speak about the need to invest in better options within local areas. And I just wonder whether anyone wants to come in and speak about that point about that this is going to perhaps involve that infrastructure, the actual houses and the places and the spaces that allow people to live their best lives.
Yeah, well, I would like to put a point across about that. I just feel that when they're building housing, why are they seem to be building more units that are like hospitals, and it should be a home. And I think it needs to, the money that's ploughed into keeping people from coming home, it's a phenomenal amount of money to keep them in hospital. You're talking, with my son, it's £1,000 a day. Plough that money into people to have their own homes, and a place that they can call home, where they feel comfortable, where they can live in the community with a package of care that is not like being in hospital. It's got to be a good package of care. And also, when people do have their homes, if they're not happy with their package of care, or if they're not happy, if it breaks down with their carers, they need to have their own home, their own tenancies, or their own houses where they don't have to move on and leave. That your home is the biggest thing, your safety net of your life, and it needs to be there. So they really needs to, they keep saying that people are in delayed discharge because there's nowhere for them to go. But there's nothing happening about it. People are stuck in hospital for years. And with regard to my son, I'm told, well, there's nothing set up for him. There's nothing in the community. But if there was something set up for him in the community, then he wouldn't have to be in hospital. I think the hospital's been used too much as a safety net, and the money is going into the funding is going through the NHS rather than going through the councils. So we have to have a turnaround in that, because it's been like this for years and it can't continue. There is opportunity to do it. So why is it not happening? There is no houses. Even when Gordon was at home, he was looking at going independent at one point, and there was nothing, absolutely nothing. There was one thing he was offered, it was a bed sit in a kind of care home with older people, and it just wasn't suitable, and I don't know why people speak out to the government about this situation and they're just not listening. I mean, it will continue to happen, and it will continue to happen again and again and again. And also, instead of getting suitable housing, people are going into hospital, into the wrong environment, into the wrong hospital care, and they're stuck. And people are stuck for years and forgotten about, and it's just not acceptable.
And I think that point about, housing needs to be separated from the support that a person has in their life, so that that right to adequate housing is upheld, irrespective of the provision of support as well. That those are seen as obviously importantly connected, but separate. And Sam, I know that there's also the importance that the support itself is designed in a way which is about protecting and respecting people's rights.
I think, to follow up on Ruth's point, it seems strange to me that we can find an expensive hospital bed, but we can't find a house. How is it possible we can spend £1,000 a day, but we can't prioritise getting a house for somebody? And the fact that it doesn't exist is not a good enough reason. If it's not there, you create it. You work, you build it. You build it with families, you build it with the person. You work in collaboration with housing providers. The people who are currently in these hospital placements are as legitimately regarded, should be as legitimately regarded as homeless as anybody else, and should be prioritised for that. But one of our requests, quite clearly, is that any state monies that are spent should be spent in a way that is compliant. And that was one of the compliant with the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. One of our absolute concerns was some of the examples, the case studies that were used in the report, the implementation report, would actually meet the definition of an institution, according to the convention, which is exactly what Ruth's saying. To move to a smaller institution is not a solution. Oh, there you go. I've got to give us we come up with a slogan. But it's just not right. And, we can couch it in all sorts of technical terms, but unless you would want to live there yourself, why are you possibly involved in designing something for other people, unless these other people are people you have othered?
It's almost the system, allows decision makers to turn away from, what needs to happen, because someone living in a placement out of their area is not a cost that is incurred therefore to that area. So these are cultural. And I wonder, Michael, can I bring you in here, because I guess the other, there's if some of this is that cultural, the how we've done things and how we need to change that to do things differently. I wonder whether you can come in and reflect on, the importance that we build in to the system an understanding of inclusive communication, of recognising people's sensory needs, recognising trauma that people have experienced, and not discounting that, but working with that, so that the actions are actually rooted in an understanding of people's lives.
Every time I speak about the subject, I always say that it's quite sad that we're still talking about people in institutions and homes as well. It's basic human rights where people can stay in the community. But Ruth, right? Everybody's entitled to their own home, our own life as well. And just touching upon Jim's point earlier on about self-directed support. I remember when the legislation was coming out back in 2013, I was working with a Scottish disability charity, and that kind of saddens me as well, because the system's broken. And and I was speaking to a carer a couple of weeks ago, and they were saying it's a postcode lottery what areas you're going to about self-directed support. Now that shouldn't be happening in this day and age, you know, but hopefully the more time we speak about it, the more it goes up the chain. But we you know, come on, you know, just do something about it, you know, because it's not fair and it's not right.
And I wonder whether you can also come in on the point around, you know, what role does advocacy play, and you know, I guess the right to information about you know, what rights you're entitled to, or what rights we're all entitled to, and you know, the role of you know, disabled people's organisations and independent advocacy organisations in you know, providing that really important I guess scrutiny side, or you know, helping to kind of make people aware of what their rights are.
Yeah, I mean, charities like Sea Change and Black Lions is good and like enable, and I could sit here all day and rhyme off different disability charities as well. But to a certain extent, the hands are basically tied, and you know, and we need to. Going back to Sam's point as well, we need to make people with a disability front and centre of kind of like decisions. It's okay making a big fancy dancy report about coming home, but where's the person with a disability? It's written about people with disabilities, but when you actually read the report, there's not somebody's experience. And that's the most important thing.
And Jim, can I bring you in on that point as well? Because I guess, you know, that how society is kind of organised, you know, makes that makes the whole environment much harder. And in some ways, that's the context in which, you know, we're living our lives in communities, and in that, if those barriers are put into place, then that makes it harder. You know, when we do experience crisis points, or if there's a breakdown in support, that you know, it all kind of it's much easier for a crisis to occur when there's other barriers in place, isn't it? And from your perspective, you know, what roles do things like independent advocacy and you know, and other supports play to make sure that we've got that right infrastructure?
That's a big question. Could I give you another example from my work? When I was decommissioning homes for physically disabled people, I employed a group of disabled people to go into the home and talk to the inmates about living in the community with their disability. This was face-to-face interactions between disabled people. And they would go, my team would go in the morning, go back home at 5 when the staff would come in and tell the inmates, that's not for you. Don't listen to them. That's not for you. So there was a conflict between what my team was trying to encourage, to raise aspirations, to raise the expectation that life outside was good and supportive, and the staff in the home saying that we were talking rubbish and that it wasn't for them. There needs to be a cultural change. And I remember Peter, one of the team, telling me of a tiny positive thing that happened in this group meeting, they talked about the food, the menu, and the menu was the same each and every week. There was no variety in the choice of eating. So Peter said to them, well, why don't you call in the cook and talk to the cook and tell him what you want? So there was a bit of a commotion, but the cook came in and talked to the inmates, and they told them what they would like to eat. And the cook said, no problem, I can do that. It was just breaking down the organizational violence between the individual and institution. It is so simple, but it's so difficult to achieve. Even deciding what to eat at night is a big breakthrough.
I think your point about it is actually so simple, isn't it? But somehow, this seems to be breaking down those organisational barriers does not seem to be happening quickly enough. And yet, in some ways, I guess the implementation report draws attention to this issue, and I guess there's which is useful that we have this opportunity to draw attention and encourage some scrutiny and make sure that the change does take place. Is there any final kind of reflections from you around? I guess what would reassure you that we're not just talking about the problem anymore. We're not just reporting on the problem, but we're actually seeing that change is happening. And I'd really welcome reflections from all of you on that. So maybe starting, Ruth, with yourself. What would any final reflections, things you would want to kind of just highlight, and what would just reassure you that this is not just talk anymore?
Well, so far, nothing has convinced me that much has changed, to be honest. Like Michael said, it's the Coming Home report didn't have the views of families, carers, even patients that are in the hospitals stuck for years, and the absolute trauma it causes to families and people stuck in hospital. I just feel as if there has to be action taken. I feel as if they're not listening enough. They don't realise that when we're all getting ignored and all these things we're asking for are not put in place, people just get so sick of the constant being buffered away and ignored. And it's always like a false promise. Well, there really has to be action taken to make sure that things are implemented to make changes and to push for change, because how much do people have to keep saying the same thing? And I know from my experience and others in my situation, other parents or other family members that have got a loved one stuck in institutions, we've been battling for years and we've got nowhere. The doors have been shut in our faces, and the longer the doors are shut in our faces, the worse our loved ones get. They lose hope, they become unwell, and like my son said in a letter I got recently, he just said he's not got a future. And he just wants to sleep all the time because he's also unhappy, and he's just, from my perspective, totally institutionalised. And that's not a way to live for any human. It's so wrong. And they say that people's human rights are upheld. Well, they're not. They're not at all. And it might be down in paper, it is. But I can tell you from what I've seen before Gordon went into hospital, when we tried to access services, help, and since the last 5 years, nothing's changed. The words are said, this is terrible, we need to get teeth to change things, this is not good enough. But that's just words, and nothing has changed. And when I highlight to I've written numerous times to the government, and I haven't even had a reply. Us and other mothers, we haven't even had a response. So I think we'll never give up, but really we all have to keep pushing and keep pushing for change, and we have to make sure it happens, because it cannot continue.
Yeah, so action, not words, Ruth. And Michael, any final reflections? What would say to you that you were beginning to see that these are not just words, these are actions and changes happening?
I would say maybe like shame on the government, and then they could do something. And I was going to say then they could do something fast, but to be honest, they should have done something about 10 years ago about it as well. It just really annoys me that, we're still talking about this issue, and I'll do whatever I can, and we'll all do what we can, but we need the big boys and big girls to listen as well. And it's Jim was saying as well, it's simple, like if you're spending all that money on like an institution, well, you could easily get people into the community, stay in the community and meet their pals and all that. But it's just a shame how like people with disabilities has got to fight for everything in life, and it's got to change. It's
important, isn't it, that we continue to hold decision makers to account, as you're saying, Michael, and I guess Sam, from your point of view, supporting people to live their best lives in the community is so possible, and your organisation is doing that. That's your mission and purpose, and there must be so many examples that where you're seeing that. What would reassure you? Do you feel that this is really being that things are changing?
Thank you for those kind words, but yes, that's the work that Sea Change does, but we're not alone. There are many organisations supporting people with reputations and being described in the way that Ruth's son and others are described, but supporting people to live in their communities, in their own homes, with the right support. It seems the strangest thing in the world for me that if people are very particular about how they need to be supported, that we try and fit those people who are very particular or discerning about how they need to be supported, that we try and fit them into something and then wonder why it doesn't work. That just seems to me quite patently ridiculous. What would it reassure me? Well, we've got the creation of the National Care Service on the horizon. It seems to me that's all meant to be based on rights and choice and control of our citizens, and that's going to be rolled out to the whole population. Maybe if we could actually see that we can do that, we can apply those principles to this cohort. So surely it's a smaller population. If we can evidence that we can support this relatively small group of people well, respecting and protecting their rights, actually looking at providing personalised support, then surely that would give us all some confidence that when it comes to this bigger programme rollout that we can be hopeful. One of the key things for me, and Jim spoke about it, is we have self-directed support on statute. It is meant to be the main lever for social care, for transferring power to the citizen. Why is it that, again, this group of people haven't got an identified individual budget that would allow, enable and support family members to begin, and the person to begin to design what they think would work for them, rather than this whole design mechanism that's outlined in the Coming Home Implementation Report, with peer support for professionals, but not peer support for the people who are currently residing in these institutions. It seems to me a little bit back to front. So the very least, to know that we were approaching this in a way that would look to protect people's rights would be that we apply that self-directed support is the lever for change.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. And Jim, finally, from yourself, you know, what anything else you would want to add and take the opportunity to highlight that would reassure you that we're beginning to see action?
Yes, back in 1983, the government set up an independent living fund in Nottingham. And this fund was to keep people out of institutions, to keep people in the community, in their homes, and with the support designed around the needs. That was back in 1983. That was so successful that by 2015, the government was spending millions and millions of pounds on the fund, and they wanted to stop the exponential rise in funding. So they closed the fund in 2015, and they were going to give the money to local authorities to follow up in their old institutional provision. We in Scotland, we disabled people in Scotland, got together and persuaded the Scottish government not to give the money to the institutions supported by local authority, but to set up the independent living fund in Scotland. Now, the First Minister announced that they were going to listen to disabled people and set up the independent living fund in Scotland, with the promise in 2015 to open it up at a later date. Now, we're now several years down the line. Sure, attrition, there's less and less, the less people being supported by the fund because they die or they move into care permanently. But despite us disabled people asking the minister, when are you going to open the fund? We fear that the Scottish Independent Living Fund will wither on the vine because more and more people will die and investigated. But the way that the fund is working involves disabled people in the policy making, involves disabled people in their own care planning. And disabled people are really, really happy with the fund because it allows them to be equal citizens, to participate in the community as they want to participate. But even though no more money is going into the fund, and we are thinking that that is a diabolical situation, particularly when social care is in such a mess as it is, run by local authorities. We need to open up the fund. We need to prove people, like disabled people, can and want to live in the community. But they can and want to be equal citizens. And if only they would close down the institutions and give more money to the Independent Living Fund, that will never happen.
Thanks, Jim. So, just ending on that point about the important role that the Independent Living Fund has played over the years in supporting people to direct and ensure that they're directing what support they have in place, and your point about the high levels of satisfaction and its success over the years, but it closed in 2015, and that would be a strong indication to you that the Scottish Government...
The way that ILF works is the way that we want social care to work.
It could be an ideal vehicle
and
for this,
an ideal vehicle
for this group of people.
This group of people out of institutions.
And would help with the other aspect, which is that we believe that no state funding should be given to develop things that are not compliant with the UN CRPD. So it just makes so much sense to use mechanisms that we already know work, and it's in existence just now.
Okay, well, thank you so much for spending time with us today and outlining the problems, the real the real situations of kind of breaches in people's rights currently, which we're experiencing, the impact that those are having. Ruth, thank you for speaking so powerfully about the impact this is having and has been having on yourself and Gordon and your whole family. And as well as that, outlining some of what we need to see in as part of the solutions going forward. And I think, Michael, your point about that we need to keep scrutinising whether or not change is happening, and Sam about the fact that we shouldn't be investing money in provision which is not compliant with human rights standards and conventions, and Jim, powerfully speaking about this is possible. It's simple and yet has not been happening. And we have some existing mechanisms which we can be using. So thank you to all of you today, and thank you to those of you who are joining us and listening to this interview and watching this interview. I'm sure you'll agree that this is something which we need to continue to monitor and make sure that change is happening. And thank you for lastly just for joining us for this latest in the Alliance Live series.
Thank you.